Hey everyone, James Azar here with the CyberHub Engage podcast. As we're in the midst of our rebrand, kind of repurposing our content, I reached out to an old and good friend of the show, Professor Yehuda Lindell from Unbound Tech, to join me to talk a little bit about what's going on with, not only COVID-19, but some of the paradigm shifts. And being that he's an encryption guru, figured we'd have a conversation a little bit about how and what role does encryption now play in this post COVID-19 era of remote work and so much more stuff. So Professor Yehuda Lindell joining us from Israel. Professor Yehuda Lindell, welcome to the podcast on this lovely day.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
It's been a very, very interesting and challenging times. I think there's a definite paradigm shift happening in cybersecurity right now. A lot of people were unprepared for what was coming, which was this whole idea of work from home, BYOD. Some organizations that employees didn't have laptops. Company laptops and had to work from their own private devices. So how are you seeing the cybersecurity paradigm shift happening? And what are some of the things you've been witnessing over the last, let's say, 45 to 50 days since this whole thing started?
So one thing which is really interesting is exactly that point. A lot of the understanding of cybersecurity in the past was, let's make sure that people are only going to work in the office on our PCs and we'll lock them down and then we'll be safe. Of course, that's only one part of it. But that limits you very much when things like COVID-19 happened or when you want to enable a flexible workforce. I remember someone was a software engineer and after 15 years in general industry went to work for the Homeland Security, some company that provides services to Homeland Security. And I said, how's the new job? And he said, it's great. And I said, oh, okay, why? He said, well, at 6 p.m. it's the end of the day and I go home. I'm not allowed to work anymore. I can't look at my laptop. I don't have a laptop. I can't look at my computer. I can't really email. So I actually have a life now in the evening. It's a nice thing about work-life balance, but I'm not sure it's exactly a very appropriate model. A, when people actually have to work from home, and B, when we can do things much more efficiently by enabling them flexibility. I called my credit card company to check something, and I got this message saying, due to COVID-19, you're going to have to wait a really long time. I thought, I'm just speaking to someone on the phone. They don't have phones at home, and they realize, they may have a phone at home, but they don't have access to the computer systems. And so these companies have built this massive infrastructure, which is completely closed down. And you think, but we're in the cloud era, or in the BYOD era. Does this actually really still exist and work? And the answer is yes. And now those companies have to revisit really, really, really quickly.
Yeah, it seems like a predominant amount of organizations, I've always kind of appreciated role-based security behavior. And then I've also kind of looked at it with a raised eyebrow, almost like The Rock, and just was like, is this really something we should be doing? Because at the end of the day, your call center employee is probably one of the most important people for your organization, because they're interfacing with the people who use your service, pay you for what you offer. And so if that happens, and you're limiting those people's access to technology, you're really creating a very difficult time for them to do their job. Are you really being security minded? And this is the paradigm shift now. I mean, this is where it all kind of comes together. Earlier this week, we did a virtual summit on the new cyber paradigm. The change of endpoints, the change of a BYOD policy. Can you even enact a BYOD policy? I mean, is that even doable anymore, Professor?
So I certainly think that there is a lot more that can be done than what is being done. So it is possible to secure endpoints. It is possible to provide strong binding to identity binding to devices and to enable work from home. It doesn't mean it's always simple. So for example, BYOD, do I want to allow my employees to use their own home phone for email? So actually, I think for the vast majority of companies, it's okay. But there are solutions that do this in a better way, right? That provide a sort of sandbox inside the phone, which is specific to the company, that enables them to continue working. There are different solutions out there. Just saying, no, it's, we're not set up for this and we're not doing any of this is a huge mistake. You're not enabling business continuity. And we know that the best way to actually break security is when security and business collides, because then ultimately business will override and just won't be secure. And the other thing that will happen is people will find all these bypasses, right? Like in the very old days when the person would plug his physical phone line into the modem, and that would be the way that hackers would get into the organization. I'm talking old days, really over 30 years ago, when they had those modems that made all those screeching noises every time you connected. So we need to find solutions and deploy solutions that actually are easy to administer, easy to deploy, work in the way that people are used to working. And these solutions do exist. There are good software solutions that provide you strong protection. There are hardware solutions as well, smart cards and the like, but they're very difficult and they don't really work well with a work from home environment. When you need that physical contact, you need to actually get the physical smart card. If you lose it, you need to replace it. If you can't replace it, you have social engineering, because you need a way to get somebody to be able to connect without it, and then you just bypass the whole system by me calling and saying, "Hi, I'm James and I lost my smart card and I looked up information about you on Facebook." I don't have Facebook, but maybe you do, so I would learn that from your Facebook, and now I can get into your account. So there are a lot of different factors around, and I think that today there are actually really good software solutions, and that's one of the things that Unbound is doing. Of course, we're not the only ones. Things like securing BYOD has nothing to do with Unbound, and there are good solutions for that, and people just have to find them.
So you bring up a really good point. So let me ask you this. You're the CEO of Unbound, and obviously this has been a shift for you guys as well. Israel was one of the first. I left Israel right before they required everyone to stay at home. And I was lucky. I landed in Israel before they required everyone who came into Israel to go into a 14-day isolation, a quarantine. And I left Israel before they shut down all flights. So I was very lucky. I was extremely, I won't say lucky, I'll say blessed when that happened. How have you been managing your teams remotely? How have you guys adjusted as an organization to COVID-19? And what are some of the lessons you guys took out of this? And you as a leader specifically, how are you leading the team now? It's different when you're face-to-face with these people and having one-on-ones, and now trying to do, these virtual Zoom happy hours. And especially with the holidays, and for a lot of people listening or watching in Israel, Passover is a really big deal. And most companies do a party for all of their employees to bring in food. They give people gift cards and stuff for the holiday. And so how have you kind of dealt with all of that? How has that adjusted? How have you adjusted to the way of doing business?
And so the first thing that we did, and I think it's really very basic, but it's really important to do, is just first to enable everybody to work from home. So what that means is, yes, all of our employees have laptops, but if there are employees who also have a desktop, then they can take that with them. We had employees take screens home, and we encourage that. What employees take chairs home, because if you're sitting on a crappy chair at home, excuse my language, then your back is going to hurt at the end of your workday. So the first thing is to enable people to build a comfortable environment at home as much as possible for them to work in, and we enabled everyone to do that. Made sure that everyone had a Zoom account. Made sure that everyone could connect to the cloud. We have two-factor authentication for connecting to our cloud, into our network, into our Git, and so on and so forth, and just verifying that everybody had that access. That was the first and most basic thing. But it was a mix of ensuring that they could work, but also B, ensuring that they could actually work in a comfortable environment. So, or doing as much as we possibly could in that direction. Of course, you can't do everything. people who don't have a spare room at home and they can't. I took over my daughter's room, but not everybody can do that, and there are always going to be those challenges. And then it's also understanding that, and we've had employees who, one employee is a mother of young children, and she's working every day from 4 p.m. to 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. Or 11:30, and that's the way she's able to divide her time with her spouse. And we respected that and allowed people that flexibility. That's just the very, very basic part. The next part is really about transparency. I know that everybody talks about transparency, but actually,
it's a buzzword.
Most people don't practice transparency. I hope that I do. I believe that I do. Actually, in the regular all hands meetings, I show the employees financial information and slides that were just coming out of the last board meeting. So I really do believe that our employees are our full partners, and they should know what's going on. There is a price to pay for that, because transparency is great when everything's going well, but it's less comfortable when things aren't going well. But actually, I believe that when things aren't going well, people know it anyway, so it's better to put it all out. The other price that you pay for transparency is that when you change your mind, you're always worried, do your employees understand that you've just, a month ago and to today, things have changed because COVID-19 developed in a very, very rapid way, and we have a different understanding today? Or do they think, oh, was he just saying something different back then because he wanted us to think, I don't know, something else? And there, I think it's a matter of building trust over time. If you've built trust over time, that you truly are transparent, you truly are telling the company what your full understanding is at the time, then when the situation changes, I believe that trust should continue to help you. And the last one is communication. So we're a small company, so it's not that difficult. But now it is. Now we don't see people, so we have a weekly all hands. Beforehand, we used to have a quarterly all hands when I started the job at the beginning of the year. So I started being CEO just a year and 2 months ago. And then we moved that a few months ago to be a monthly all hands, just before everybody moved to work from home. And then as soon as we went to work from home, we actually moved that to a weekly all hands, where it's a shorter one. There isn't always that much information to tell, but it can be me talking and it could be somebody else presenting things that are going on in the company. Letting people understand and know what's going on is really important, A, for their morale, and second, for getting their input and getting their participation in that. When you're focused on a very, very limited thing, your help is also, your contribution is limited to that. But if you understand other things that are going on, then you can contribute in a more significant way, and we want our employees to do that.
You bring up a very good point. There's a price to pay with transparency, and I think the upside beats the downside. I think when people know you're going through a rough time and you're transparent with them, and you've always been transparent with them, then they really buy in even more to ensure that the company gets over that period quicker and more efficiently than before. And that's inherently a leadership skill that I almost wish more people would adopt, specifically in the public sector.
Yes, I find it surprising that it's hard. Like, to me, there are a lot of things in this job that I came from academia, so it's a very different environment. And a lot of things in this job that I had to learn, and I still have to learn, and I find very difficult, and are very, very challenging. But transparency seems to me to be the most natural thing, and it's not just with your employees; it's also with your investors. It's also with your customers. I remember seeing one of the salespeople cringe when I was in a very important meeting, and I started describing what are the weakest points of our solution. I guess it's my academic background. I just describe everything. I give the pros and the cons, and I also say what the weakest points are and how we can mitigate them. And after the meeting, the salesperson said to me that the customer told him that the part of the meeting that he liked the most, it's like a 1-hour meeting. The part of the meeting that he liked the most was when I focused on and explained what the weak points of our solution are. And because then they really believed that they've been given the full picture and they understand and they know what's going on there. And there is, again, that transparency.
It gives you more information to buy. I wish more people would do that.
Yeah, and it's not a tactic. I really just think that's the way to do it. If our solution is not suitable for someone because in their threat model, the way that we relate to this is not significant, but for them specifically, it is really significant, then that's fine. They should buy something else. But we believe in our product, and we believe that it actually has a very large appeal to a very large audience. Then let's tell everybody exactly what it does, and that large audience who our threat model is suited for them will come along and buy, and that's the best way to do business also, in my opinion.
I completely agree. I mean, so often, I can't tell you as a CISO, since this COVID-19 thing has happened, I get about 75 junk emails into my inbox of, I'd love to get 15 minutes of your time. I'd love to hear 30 minutes. I'd love to be able to tell you this. Oh, and by the way, we solve all of. I have had several emails where it says I solve all of these problems for you, and I can protect everyone in your organization. And I'm just like, please stop. I've had to beef up my email filters, so specific keywords end up going into the junk. A combination of several keywords. I've been able to put it
perfectly secure.
I've got a combination of filter. I won't say it because I don't want people to beat my filter. I've reduced my spam from 75 emails to about 100. I was getting at the very beginning, I was getting around 175 emails a day.
Wow.
Now I'm getting about 7 or 8 emails that get through my email filter. So I'm much happier.
Yeah, I'm sure.
On
another note of so that what you're saying is an important point. I remember very early on, I was very insistent on, we never say if we had been there, this breach wouldn't have happened.
Yeah,
that's. I don't want to use the word that I think when I read those.
When I see that on my LinkedIn feed, I go block.
Exactly. So that's one. The second is, there's no perfect security. There is no perfect solution. There are only things that make it there. If I can explain to you clearly what the threat model is that we deal with, and how you can deploy it in different ways based on your specific understanding of your security threats, then that's the way to approach it. And the last thing I want to say is, again, relating to transparency. So one of the things that happened quite early on, a couple of years back, we're talking to a bank which became a customer afterwards, and one of the things they said was, how do we verify that your solution really does what you say? So apart from the fact that we've done independent review and we will give you all the explanation, I said, under NDA, and that the NDA is only because of intellectual property issues, you can review every line of source code. And they looked at me like, really? You actually agree to that? I said, yeah, I have absolutely no problem with that. Well, why not? The security is not in the code, it's in the key, right?
Right.
But there's still too many vendors, the HSM vendors of the world today, you're still doing security by obscurity. And it just doesn't make any sense. Why? So the truth is the chances of a customer actually doing a code review are very, very low. But I really am happy for them to do it if they want to. And in fact, someone said, what if they find mistakes? And someone in the company asked me, I said, fantastic. They've actually, for free, improved the security of our product. That's a great thing.
You'd almost wish more people did that. Almost. Unfortunately, that's I can't tell you how challenging it is sometimes to get a straight answer to a simple question. It's a yes or no, and you end up getting 7 paragraphs of information that is really neither yes nor no, nor maybe, nor any of it. It's just, let me recycle old stuff. A bit challenging. I want to set the premise for our next topic, our next question, which is, it's the end of April. We're starting to see more and more people start to talk about lifting quarantine. How are we going to get back to some resemblance of normal? We've seen that when Singapore, which was one of the first, and South Korea, they were one of the first to really do quarantine. Then they started lifting restrictions. Then they got hit with a second wave. They went right back into quarantine, and now they're still in quarantine. Same thing in Japan and other places. Well, we're going to lift this slowly, surely, state by state, region by region here in the U.S. And, I think major metropolitan areas need to go slower in reopening than, let's say, places out where people live, half a mile from each other. I think there's less of a chance for infection, and smaller communities just, make them sit 6 feet apart at church, ensure restaurants let people sit 6 feet apart, use gloves, make people wash hands. Simple hygiene will help reduce that in the smaller communities. I think major metro areas, this is going to be a challenge until there's some sort of either herd immunity or a vaccine. But for those who are untuned, in about 6 months, we have a presidential election in the U.S. And what also happens to happen in 6 months is flu season, or as I like to call it, the era of the sick. And it seems like people are almost have blinders on, saying, we'll be fine, election, people can still go to the polls. And in my hearts of hearts, I already know that the third wave of this, there's going to be a second wave that's going to happen in June, July. And then that's going to quiet down because of summer, everything else. And then October, November is when flu season hits, and we're not going to have herd immunity, and it's going to be around election time. And so let's talk a little bit about securing a mobile election. People are talking about mail-in ballots and a lot of different things, but what role can encryption play in developing some sort of, I don't know if it would be an app or a web or something that would really secure the election? Because part of the kind of people viewing electronic voting bad is because of Russian interference, fear of hackers being able to get into it. So how do you see maybe encryption in general, and just how do we really kind of transition to that?
Okay, so first I'll start with an easier solution than doing a secure digital election, and that's transitioning to dictatorship. What I'm trying to say is this is an extremely, extremely hard problem. I think the lack of trust that people have in it is based on a few issues. Number one, the extremely poor experience of what happens when the actual voting machines that people built, which are just atrocious in terms of the security, completely atrocious. So it doesn't mean you can't do these things well or better, but what has been done so far has been outrageously bad. Now, when we come to talk about a mobile or a digital election, one of the very important observations is that the problem is I can solve the cryptographic aspect of this, right? And enable people to vote in a way that they could verify, and in a way that their vote remains private. And all of these things actually have good technical cryptographic solutions. And so the pure cryptographers are always happy to say, here, we can do a secure election. And then along comes Matt Blaze, if you know him, and says, you're just as an example, but a prime example of this is you're only looking at really a tiny part of the problem. There's a lot when it comes to elections, it's not just having them secure. It's not just making sure that the correct candidate wins. It's also making sure that there is a belief and trust by the people that the correct candidate won. It's also a well-accepted paradigm, and really I think that what I would suggest to you, my suggestion to you, is to do one of these with Matt Blaze, and he'll give you really a full understanding. He's testified to Congress about this. This is really his field. So I'm coming out here as a pure amateur. One of the really important things is having a paper trail. So what that means is, yes, we can use something digital. When we talk about voting machines that you actually have to go to, one of the things that we like to have is that you vote on the machine, and that is done digitally, but you also print something out that goes into the ballot, and you can use that as a backup and as a verification. To do something which is purely from home mobile, you lose that backup, which means that you can't actually detect if an attack took place. And that's the biggest fear when you don't have any paper trail. When you have a paper trail, you can do random sampling of polling stations to verify that things match up and get high confidence via that. And when it's a purely digital, purely on mobiles, then that's impossible. And I actually think that it's not a good solution. What is a good solution? That I don't have any good answers. I think that some people say actually the better solution is to go for a full postal vote. What are we losing by doing a full postal vote? Well, I'm sure there are lots of problems with full postal votes as well. But the question of whether it's hard to count and it takes longer to count, I think is not interesting. But then, yes, you do have the problem of how do I know that my vote actually got delivered and didn't get lost in the mail, or people didn't divert letters from certain areas. Actually, I don't think that there is any really good solution to this problem. But I do want to stress a pure mobile where I just vote only on my mobile and it's just an app that uses the best cryptography and encryption around it, that would not be a satisfactory solution. Can we combine that with something else? That's very likely that we can. And I assume that people have looked at this well. The problem is that I have very little faith in the ability for this to move into production by November. That someone, or October, but for someone, is it October or November?
It's the first Tuesday of November, so you can say it's October, because it's like the first Tuesday of the month of November.
Yeah, so the chances of actually building a solution that is validated, can be rolled out at the scale that it needs to, by then, I fear is very, very low. And so maybe we have to vote over multiple days. Maybe we have to say, okay, so it's not we're voting on a single day. We'll have the polling stations open for 2 weeks, and we'll have people coming in at very specific time slots that they're given. Or I don't know. I don't know.
Sorry to interrupt, Professor. There's a lot of very interesting concepts around that. Just for people to understand, in the history of the U.S., there's even during World War II, the presidential election was never ever delayed. And the president doesn't have the power to delay the election. Only Congress does. And so if you want to figure out how useless and impossible that's going to be, just watch the U.S. Congress's behavior since this whole thing started. And you can kind of get an idea that none of that's really going to happen. It's very interesting. I had on Jake Braun, who's the co-founder of the Black Hat Voting Village. And we were talking a little bit about this, and we were talking a little bit about cryptography, and we're talking a little bit about kind of developing apps, and one of the challenges that a lot of counties did in the U.S. simply because the federal government doesn't run the election. Every county individually has its own resources, gets a little bit of money from the federal government, but then they all buy kind of their own voting machines. They all set up their own IT infrastructure to those voting machines. CISA has a bunch of helpful stuff for them. And it seems like there's just an inherent challenge in kind of trying to find the right formula. One, from authenticating a voter, right? So ensuring that this person is registered to vote and can legally vote. Number two is that vote actually gets collected properly and then sent without being changed, manipulated in any sort of way. And then limiting that a person cannot vote more than once. So something very common in the U.S., Professor, that a lot of people may not know is several people are residents of several states. So I'm a resident of several states, but I can only vote in one, right? And so some people, it's actually voter fraud, and several people have gone to jail for this in the last election cycle, where someone cast a Florida ballot and a California ballot, and you can't do both. And so how do you get electronically someone to not vote twice?
You need to anonymize the votes. Yeah. But I actually think that cryptographically we can solve those problems. The problems of double voting we can solve. The problems of ensuring that... so here's an interesting one, right? Cryptographically we can easily solve a situation where you can verify that your vote was actually counted. The problem is that you have to be quite a technical person to be able to do that. The average person, it's very hard for them to actually do that. So maybe they could go into a website and type in some long random number they got, and I'll tell them, yes, your vote was counted, and they'll look at it and say, does that mean anything? I mean, what actually happened here? Does that actually build confidence? Oh, that's very unclear. And that's part of the problem. And if somebody does decide to DDoS a whole lot of mobiles and infrastructure in a certain state that had different political leaning, or there are many ways to interrupt such an election, and it's extremely challenging. So I know that I'm disappointing you because you wanted to. A professor of cryptography must know the answer.
Well, I don't think anyone knows the answer.
It's extremely difficult.
And Professor, I don't think anyone knows the answers. I don't think there's one person that can come with a perfect plan that isn't going to get rejected by at least 50% of the people who will hear it. It's inherently bad. It's also very interesting to see that during this COVID-19, I will tell you one thing. If you've ever wanted to get governments to catch up with technology, thank you, China. That is the one thing I will thank you for. You have streamlined government to realize very, very quickly that, okay, we should probably get rid of our server room, move to the cloud, and streamline everything that people would come into City Hall to do online. I couldn't get a business license issued without having to drive down to City Hall, where I live. Now, no issues whatsoever. I do it all online. Don't even need to walk into City Hall. So I'm grateful for that, because now I never have to go into City Hall. And so that's one aspect I think that's really been streamlined, but there's no one good or bad kind of thing. Good or bad. So there's a lot of bad solutions for this and very few good ones, is what I would say.
If you ask me what camp am I pretty much in, I'm pretty much in a camp that traditional ways, probably given even though there are really some really cool cryptographic solutions, I find it hard to believe that they'll be deployed in a secure way. But maybe a combination is possible. Maybe a combination of the two would actually be able to work. But it's, yeah.
So I was watching Dr. Nigel Smart, your academic at Unbound Tech. He's been on the show before. I watched his RSA talk, and I missed it in person simply because I was so busy at RSA, and it was there were 3 sessions I wanted to go to. His was one of them. And I think the first time you and I ever spoke, I told you I'm a cryptographic nerd, in the fact that I feel like cryptography is the ultimate challenge of being a great security person. If you don't understand cryptography, I don't think you can be a security guy, really security. You can, everyone can understand the next shiny box. But here's the interesting aspect. There's thousands of ways to do encryption, but there's only a handful of ways to do it right. And a lot of times, there's that common misunderstanding, especially when I speak to interns or I speak to students of cyber, where I go, so what have you guys done cryptography wise? And they go, well, nothing yet. We understand AES 256 encryption and what that means. And I'm just like, can we please just focus a little bit more on the aspect of how do you properly deploy cryptography based on your architecture and infrastructure, which is a challenge for many, many people.
How do you protect the keys? How do you enroll properly? How do you manage policies of key usage and key rotation? Just AES is like, okay, that's the basic building block, but how do you use it? Is it actually being used correctly? That's actually a user doesn't need to care about, but when you buy from the vendor, you actually need to check this, because we know of examples very recently even of large companies that just are doing the wrong thing very basically, in a very basic way. Key exchange, how are you authenticating to servers? How are the server certificates being protected, the private keys? There are a huge amount of issues around that. And here there are solutions out there. And Unbound is focused actually exactly in this area of managing and protecting keys for the entire life cycle, enabling it in software in a way that you can deploy it flexibly according to your needs. And but before you could choose to buy from Unbound, if you're a security specialist or an expert, or you're learning security, you have to understand how to build a threat model, how to analyze your system, where your threats are coming from, where your risk is, and then choose the right solution that matches that. Without that, you're sort of buying security solutions without even really understanding what you need or why, and then you may not even be deploying it or configuring it correctly. So yeah, teaching AES 256 is probably the least important thing that we could teach people.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And there's a bunch of YouTube videos that talk about that. So save your money, don't pay it for your college, skip that class, and just you've been doing a bunch of webinars. I know I've seen you very active. Do you have any webinars coming up over the next few weeks?
Yeah, we actually do. So me personally, I actually have a couple. I'm speaking to Nigel next week.
Okay, I'll be signing up for that one.
How we both got into MPC and how we came to found Unbound. That'll be fun. I'm sure we'll be stirring each other a little bit during the webinar as well. I have one with a partner of ours in Indonesia to talk about digital authentication in Southeast Asia and how what paradigm shifts are needed there. He will talk about the business side, and I'll bring the cryptographic technical side. We have, as a company, we've had webinars with KPMG around cryptocurrency custody. We're doing that a lot now. We find it very effective. People are at home. They want to hear good content, and we're trying to provide it.
Absolutely. Folks can go to Unbound Tech, or you can follow Professor Yehuda Lindell on LinkedIn to see his webinars, or you can follow Unbound Tech on LinkedIn as well to see those announcements as they come along. Definitely some great stuff between Professor Lindell and Dr. Smart. For those who've been on the show, Dr. Smart's just the most colorful personality you'd ever meet in encryption, ever. Because typically most encryption folks are not very colorful, but Dr. Smart is that one unicorn in there. I love having him on, and he'll be on the show next week as we wrap up the old CyberHub Engage podcast and we transition, because on May 4th, the force will be changing here at CyberHub Engage. catering based on some of our focus groups at RSA and some of the feedback we've gotten from our listeners. So we're very, very excited about that. So we're always kind of wrapping this up with the great Professor Yehuda Lindell. And next week, we'll have Dr. Nigel Smart on the show, and I'm very much looking forward to both of those. Professor Lindell, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it. And any parting words?
Stay safe.
Yeah, folks, stay safe, stay healthy. I live in Georgia, where our governor has decided to pretty much lift restrictions effective Friday. And so today's Thursday. Tomorrow, you can go to the barbershop and get a haircut, go to a massage parlor and get a massage, and go to a nail salon and get your nails done, which is great and not so great. It's great for my buddy Narek. Shout out for Jack and Sons Barbershop. They get to open back up. These guys have been in business for 10 years, a father and son barbershop here in Alpharetta, Georgia, and they could definitely use the business again. So if you're from around Georgia, go check out Jack and Sons and support small and local business. Professor Lindell with Unbound Tech, make sure you go check him out, unboundtech.com or Unbound Tech on LinkedIn, or Professor Yehuda Lindell on LinkedIn as well. Connect with them, pick his brain. Very, very smart guy, always busy, but he'll always make time for the right conversation. Until next time, folks, we're wrapping up here. Stay safe, stay healthy, and most importantly, drink espressos, not black coffee. That's it for us here today. James Azar, folks, signing out.